open this up here and you should be able to see my screen. I'm going to start with the Notion template and just talk through this here a little bit. So in here, we kind of talked through all of this yesterday. You can see that I have all of my actions and triggers kind of laid out in here, and I have it all populated. Everything down at the bottom, all of the different templates and everything that I needed to build, I've built that in my account. So when I'm plugging and playing here, just know that I've already gone in and written my emails, I've built my forms, I've done all of that prep work, so that when I come in and build the workflow today, you'll see how easy it is to just go in and plug things in based off of what is written out here, okay? So we're just gonna start at the top, we're gonna work our way through. Now, when I go into Dubsado, I'm underneath templates and workflows, because that's obviously where you're gonna build your workflows at. These two workflows that you see here, I'm going to explain those tomorrow, just so you're not saying when I go to my workflows page, I'm not seeing those workflows. They're just things that I'm going to add in and talk about tomorrow. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna start fresh. And what I recommend doing, because we're building our workflows in phases, what you're going to do is set up those phases first. That's what I really like to do. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to click add workflow, and the name of this workflow, we're going to relate this to a wedding. So what I like to do, and this is just me personally, I like to use emojis because it makes things more fun, obviously. And when you're doing your business, you want it to be fun when you're customizing things. So I'm going to put in here, I'm going to open up my emoji screen. I know people are going to be asking me, how do you get emojis? The answer to that is, if you're using a Mac, if you do Control Command Spacebar, it'll open up your emoji window and you can plug in emojis in different places. For Windows, I'm not really sure how to do that. I'm more of a Mac person. I mean, my last name is Macbeth, so Macbeth, I'm a Mac person. So you can put emojis in here if you want to make it more fun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in wedding, and we're going to call this one inquiry, because if you remember from day 2, we're putting this into the different phases: inquiry, booking, and booked. Okay, so I'm going to make my inquiry workflow first, so I have my template there. Then I'm going to go back to the workflow page and I'm going to make my other 2. So I'll come in here, we'll put, another emoji in here if we want to. We'll plug in a little bride there, and we'll do wedding booking, because that's the second workflow that we're gonna have, is booking. All right. And then the third one we're gonna do, exact same thing here, add workflow. Again, we'll plug in that little emoji there, and we're gonna say wedding booked. Because if you remember from our template, we literally have it broken up into those 3 phases. So we're going to look at the inquiry one first. That's going to be the first one that we're going to tackle. And we're going to plug in the actions just for that particular workflow first. So I have my wedding inquiry workflow, and I'm going to click the settings gear over here to open up, and we're going to start plugging in actions. So the first thing that I want to do here in this workflow, we're just going to literally look at this template, and we're just going to plug in everything that we need to do. The first thing that I have is a task, which is to review the lead capture form. And that's going to be a to-do that gets created after the workflow has started. Because remember, lead capture form gets filled out, project gets created, and the lead capture starts the workflow. We talked about that yesterday. So the first action here is going to be add action. And I'll take a brief second to talk about this. On day 2, we talked about what, when, and which. What you want to do, when you want it to happen, and which piece of content is going out. If you've written your process in that way, this modal right here is going to make all the sense in the world. That's why I wanted to talk about that on day 2. So here underneath action, we're going to choose what we want to do. And we have the list of all of the different actions there, but on our template, we're already good to go. So we can just go down to create to do, and it'll pop up our modal here. Now, the assigned user, I will talk about this because it is a little bit important. The assigned user is going to be whose dashboard this task goes onto. So if this is blank, it's only going to be available in the project or on your main task list. It's not going to be on your dashboard. How you can determine if you want a task to be on your dashboard or not is to assign it to yourself. So we'll put it there. I'm just going to assign myself to it. Now the when section is immediately after the workflow has started. So if you're not familiar with building workflows, this right here is where you can play around with a time frame. And on Tuesday, we talked about how you should be very specific on when things should happen, because when you're building your workflow actions, you're going to be putting in the exact time frame that you want things to happen. So here I'm going to say 0 days, which means immediately. So 0 anything means immediately. So 0 days after the workflow has started. Now, a little bit of a bonus tip here. When you're creating to-dos, you can use smart fields inside of your to-dos to provide more context. So I'll give you an example here. So in here, I want to review the lead capture form. So I'm just going to say review the lead capture form for, and what I do now is put in smart fields that will give context. So I can put in client name, and whenever this activates, whether an email goes out to me, because right down here, you can send an email reminder if you want to. But if you want this to have context, you can put in these smart fields. So review lead capture form for client name. If I want to, I can also put in the project date to make sure I'm available if I'm capturing that on my lead capture form. I could say smart field project, and I could say project start, and that's going to plug in whatever day they put on that lead capture. So these smart fields are going to give me a lot of context. If I wanted to put call client name and then put their phone number in there, it'll automatically drop it into that to-do, so I don't have to go looking for it. It's all in that task there, especially if I decide to send an email reminder to myself, then I'm on the go all the time. I get an email and it literally just says review the lead capture form for Cameron Macbeth. This is the date. So I could be on the go and get more context of what's happening there. Okay. So that's going to be my first to do. Really simple. The next thing that I want to do in my workflow, because we're just building actions on top of each other, what I'm going to do is I'm going to email the discovery call scheduler. And like we talked about yesterday, you always want to use send appointment scheduler when you're emailing. That was the guideline number 2 that we talked about. So in here, really simple, add action, click the drop down. I'm automatically going to go to send appointment scheduler here. The context on this is, if we go back here, immediately after all previous actions are complete, because with a task, what we want to do is when that task gets created to review the lead capture form, I only want this scheduler to go out once I get done completing that task. So this would be immediately after all previous actions are complete, because I do have to get that task done beforehand. Okay, so immediately after all previous actions are complete. Now, we talked about approves on Tuesday, I believe it was, is when we talked about approve buttons. Anything that you are emailing to a client, so send email, send appointment scheduler, send form, send contract, all of those things that are going out to a client, you have the ability right here to say require approval before completing this action. So that basically means that once I check off that to do and it gets to that action, I'm going to receive an email saying, hey, are you ready for this to go out? If I am ready, I can approve it and send it. If I want to make customizations or tweaks, I can go into the project and I can do that inside of the project there. So I'm going to put an approval on here because I have it written in my process. Now, the one thing that is not in the workflow template, so just at least for this particular action, I want to discuss this. When we move through the rest of the workflow, I'll kind of move past it. But send scheduler options. These three things right here basically get to tell you where or how you want to send it. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Send email and apply to portal is going to be probably what you're going to be doing most of the time. It's where you're actually wanting to send the scheduler with an email. And that's how you're pretty much going to be doing most things. What else you can do though is you can apply to portal only, basically. So what that means is the workflow is going to do this in the background. It's not going to send an email with whatever scheduler or form you have. It's going to, behind the scenes, put it into the portal. I'm going to use this a lot in the booked workflow. So you can do that as an option if you want to upload a scheduler or a form to the portal directly. You can use that. Then apply to project only means that it's going to put that template in the project and it's just going to set it in there, meaning the client does not have access to it. So if you are in an industry or a business where you want to fill something out for your client or on their behalf, you can use apply to project only, and it's just going to put it in the project with a needs sending badge because it hasn't gone out to the client yet. So now I have a lot of different things that I can do with this scheduler template. I could send it via email. I could go to the portal only or go to the project only. In this case, I want to email this scheduler because I want them to be able to see it in an email. What else you're going to notice here is if you click apply to portal, it gets rid of the email portion at the bottom. So now all I need to do is just choose the template there. But if I go back to send email, now I have the email composer because I'm going to send it via email. So I'm going to choose send email, and this is where the content comes in. When I'm on calls with people, this is where some people might say, oh, well, I don't have my scheduler template built yet, or, oh, I don't have my canned email ready. That's why I wanted to kind of talk about that the last 2 days. Now, I know I'm sending out my 30-minute consultation, so boom, I have it already built. I can add it in there. The email to send, I'm going to scroll down here to the wedding section because I basically label all of my different things here wedding. And right here, you see I have a 30-minute consultation invitation, which basically just says, thank you for inquiring about having me take pictures for your wedding. I'd love to chat with you more. Here's the scheduler link to book the call. And that's going to tie, like we talked about yesterday, into the consultation scheduler. That's going to plug in that bracket area. That's where I want the scheduler to fit. Then, and this is just really great business advice as well. When you're doing these emails, it's excellent advice to put in instructions on what the client needs to do. When you spend a lot of time in Dubsado, you get familiar with how things work and how your process works. Don't forget that your client does not know what your business process is. So in this email, I have something that says, once you've booked this appointment, you're going to be sent letting them know, hey, this is what's coming next and what you can expect, or this is what you should do. So don't be afraid to put instructions, even though to you that might feel redundant because you know what you're doing. Give the client some help and walk them through and kind of handhold them through the process there. So I'll click apply, and that's the next action. Really simple. So then we go to the next one. I want to send out my questionnaire right after they book an appointment. So we're going to come back over here, add action. We're using send form because we're sending out a questionnaire, if you remember that from yesterday. The time frame, we're going to use immediately after an appointment has been scheduled. Now, this is very important to know. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but with this, it's going to ask you which scheduler template are we watching for. And I mentioned it yesterday, but with forms and schedulers, you can only watch forms and schedulers that are being sent in this workflow right now. It can only look at actions that are happening here. So in here, if I click this drop down, it's only going to show consultation because that's the only scheduler I have here. So in here, if I click this, it's watching that 30-minute consultation. And once someone schedules, it's going to do whatever I've told it to do. I don't really need an approval on this one according to my process, so I'll skip over that. I do want to send it via email to the client. So now we're just going to plug in the templates. So I have my wedding pre-consultation questionnaire right here. And the email that I'm going to use for that is right here, pre-consultation questionnaire. So in here it says, I'm looking forward to chatting with you soon because they've booked a call. So I'm looking forward to chatting with them. I would love to have you fill out this questionnaire and have it ready before our call with the form link. We talked about that yesterday. The form is going to link in to where those brackets are at, create the button that they can click on to access that form. So we'll click apply. Boom, good to go there. The next thing that's on here is send a follow-up if they don't fill it out after 2 days. Now, we had a great question yesterday about how you actually make this work on the follow-ups. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the exact same thing and say send form again. The reason why I'm going to do that, and this is just good information to have, the way that forms work in the workflow is that if I were to go in here, actually, I'll just hold off on that for just a second and I'll explain it as I go. So I want to send this form. I'm going to send a form to them and I have it in my process 2 days after they haven't filled it out. So in this section, I'm going to say 2 days. And remember, we're using after form is not completed, which is down here at the bottom. Typically, or typical just to the scheduler, like what I talked about, it's going to ask you, what form are we going to watch to see if they've completed it or not? And we only have one form in here right now, and that's the pre-consultation questionnaire. So I can just plug that in. So 2 days after the form is not completed, the questionnaire, what do I want to do? I want to send a form. What form am I going to send? The questionnaire, right? So in this section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the exact same form. This is great information to know. With forms in the workflow, if I'm doing something like this where I'm picking the same form again, it is going to send the exact same form back out to them. It's not going to send out a new template. It's going to be the exact same form that's in their project. So in here, I'm literally just telling the workflow I want to resend this form back out to the client. The email that I'm going to use, though, is going to be a follow-up email. So I have my pre-consultation questionnaire follow-up, which basically is saying, hey, I'm looking forward to chatting with you soon. I noticed that you haven't filled out the form yet. So the language is a little bit different here. Please fill out the questionnaire below before our call. And you can see I have that form link in there. Now, some questions that people have is, can't I just use send email and just send them an email that they haven't finished their form? You can do that, but hopefully you're kind of thinking where I'm going here, like what we talked about yesterday. If you want that form in the email, you have to use send form, not send email. If you were to choose send email, what you would have to do is say, hey, I noticed you haven't filled out your form yet, your questionnaire. Please refer to the previous email that I sent to actually do that. So here you can actually resend the form back to them so it's in the email, which is easy access for them, okay? So I'll plug that in. Now what you're gonna see here is send the questionnaire if the questionnaire is not completed in 2 days. So it's gonna look from the moment it gets sent to the client, it's gonna watch it, 2 days have passed, it's gonna resend that email with just a new email in there, okay? Now, we have 2 more things here. Prep for the discovery call is a task. So I'm gonna come in here, Really simple. We kind of already talked about tasks. So I'm going to do create to do. We'll put me as an assigned user here. And I want to be reminded to prep for this call, basically to kind of look through their questionnaire. I want to prep for this call a day before. So I'm going to say 1 day before an appointment start time. And again, because it's a scheduler trigger, it's going to ask, which scheduler are we going to look at? Which again, we only have one, and that's the 30-minute consultation. And in here, I'm going to say prep for consultation with, and again, let me go ahead and just plug in a smart field, prep for consultation with the client name. If I'm going to call them, maybe it's a call that I'm doing, I'll just go in here and do client phone. So I just know what that is. So that was an example of what you can do there. And then I'll click apply. So very simple. 1 day before the appointment start time, I'm going to have a task that gets created for just me. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a task to decide if they're going to move forward or not. Now, I'm going to plug this in, and then I want to give a little bit of business advice here. So I'm going to click add action, create to do. Again, just going to create a task here. I'll assign it to myself. I'm going to say immediately after the appointment has ended. So immediately once the appointment is over, we're going to watch that consultation again. So we're still watching the same scheduler template. It's all based around that consultation. Immediately after their consultation is over, I want to decide if, I'm going to plug in a client name here, decide if so-and-so is moving forward or not. Now, let me explain why I'm putting a task in here. A lot of people are so caught up in automation that they forget that when you're doing a consultation, you don't know if they're going to be moving forward or not. They might say, I'm thinking about it, but I need to talk to my partner first. Or yes, I'm ready to move forward. Or no, actually, I think I'm going to go in a different direction. All of these different things. Or maybe they don't show up for the appointment. So what this allows me to do is, once the appointment is over, that's the end of my inquiry workflow and I have a task. What that's going to allow me to do is maybe I develop a not a good fit workflow that if the call did not go the way that I thought it was, I can manually go apply a different workflow in their project, or maybe they're ready to move forward so I can move on to the booking phase of the workflow. Maybe I have another version that is a follow-up with them after 2 months workflow because they weren't sure. By doing it this way, instead of building one massive long workflow, I can end it here. And that gives me the ability to basically say, okay, consultation's over. I want to go down this route and manually apply the workflow here, or manually apply the workflow here. Typically between inquiry and booking, you're probably not going to be doing it completely automated because you just don't know how that consultation is going to go if you're doing one. So that's just a little bit of business advice. Don't get too caught up in automation where you forget, oh yeah, the client has to make a decision where I need to have some control over it. Now, what I can do though is this. Inside of the workflow, we talked a little bit about this yesterday when we had the Q&A at the end, so I'll talk about it here so everyone's kind of up to speed on what we discussed. In here, what I'm able to do, someone asked about, is there a way to connect one workflow to the next one? And there is. The action that you can use to do that is called start a workflow. And what that basically does is you're telling the workflow, I want you to start another one. And so by doing that, you can have it continuously move over to the next one if you want it to. We're going to do that for booking and booked. I'll show you specifically how to do that. For this scenario, I'm going to say start a workflow after everything above it is completed. And the workflow I'm going to start is going to be my booking workflow. Now, let me explain why I'm doing this here, and I'm going to add that to the bottom. So you might have just said, why are you putting that in there if you don't want them to automatically go to the next workflow phase. The reason why is because I have a to-do before it. So technically, this last action, it has to have the task above it marked completed before it can start the next workflow. So here's what I would do if I was running this as a business owner. Once the appointment is over and I have this task that populates, basically, if I decide that everything went well and they're ready to move forward, I would just mark this task complete and then it would start the next workflow. Now you have to really understand and be comfortable with workflows to have that faith that you know, boom, click the to do and it starts the next workflow. If they're not a good fit, I could not check that to do off and I would go just manually start another workflow. But I have it built in where if I do check this task off, it's going to start the next workflow and kick in the booking workflow. So hopefully that makes sense on why I did put that at the bottom. But what I basically did was put a to do above it. So that way I have some control whether or not that booking workflow is going to kick in. Now, with this, the other reason I have a task there is because with start a workflow, you'll notice there's no approve buttons. So you can't approve for a start a workflow action, or else I would probably do something like that. But by using a task, it's kind of doing the same thing where it's holding at that task and then moving them forward. So with that being said, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 actions in the process that I wrote out. And in here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the extra one down there at the bottom. But basically, I just literally took the 6 actions that I have written out and I plugged them into the workflow. And that's all I need. I have my workflow built for my inquiry stage just by looking and just plugging in exactly what I have written out on that Notion template. This portion right here is not that exciting because all you're doing is just plugging and playing from what you have written out there. Okay, so that's number one. Now we're going to move into the booking workflow here. So if I come here, I'm going to go back to workflow, and now we're going to build out the booking workflow. And I'm realizing that these are not really in order, and that actually bothers me because I'm kind of anal about the way things look. So let me actually just put these in the right place here so that it actually goes inquiry, booking, and booked. Just refreshed my page. I don't know if it should pop up. I hope it pops up here. There we go. Now it's coming back. So inquiry, booking, and booked. So now if I go into the booking workflow, now we're just gonna plug that in. So I'll come in here, and before I put in my first action, I'm gonna do a little bit of education here for people. Payment plans. A lot of people are wondering, where does your payment plan fit into the mix here? Up at the top, you'll see where it says payment plan optional. Because I'm putting my proposal in this particular workflow, because this is technically where I'm going to introduce the proposal to them, this is the workflow that you want to have your payment plan in as well. So here, under this drop down, I'm going to add my 50/50 payment plan here. If you're taking notes at home, wherever you are introducing pricing, or you're wanting the invoice to get created, or you're introducing a proposal, whenever it gets to that booking portion, that's the workflow you should have your payment plan in. The reason why is because when this workflow gets added into the project, because there's a payment plan on there, it's going to actually build a blank invoice in the project and get it prepped for the proposal. So I don't want to put my 50/50 on my inquiry workflow, because then it's going to create an invoice too soon. That's another reason that you don't want a 90 action workflow, is because if there's a payment plan in there, then literally everybody gets an invoice, no matter if they're moving forward or not. This gives me the ability to kind of dictate whether or not I actually want an invoice to be created, because they have to get through that inquiry before they move into this spot here. Another reason why workflows and phases is really good is because not every single client is going to start at the very beginning. There's a lot of people who might come in and say, hey, I don't need a consultation, just give me the proposal and let's do this thing. If that's the case, I can just create a project for them and I can start them at the booking workflow and not all the way at the beginning of a massive workflow. So this allows for more flexibility. You're not tied into just one huge workflow. I can say, oh, I want to start them at booking or I want to start them at booked. I can have a little bit more variety and flexibility there. So I have my payment plan in there. Now we're going to follow the booking process, and we only have 5 actions, but in here we technically only have 4 because the lead becomes a job. I told you we were going to talk about that tomorrow, so I'm going to leave that one alone for this webinar and we'll talk about it tomorrow. So I'm only going to have 4 actions in this particular workflow, only 4. So add action, we're sending a proposal. So we're going to choose send form. We talked about that yesterday. And when we're going to do this is after the workflow has started, because inquiry gets done, it starts number 2, which is your booking workflow. So the moment that this gets started, we want that proposal to go out. But if we look at our process here, I have an approve button on there. Maybe what I want to have happen is when this workflow starts, it sends me an email that says, are you sure you want the proposal to go out yet? Another great piece of advice, if you are new to workflows, there is no shame in putting approve buttons on everything. I kind of think about approve buttons in the beginning almost like training wheels. It keeps things from just automatically going out. It allows the workflow to sit there and it will send you an email saying, hey, are you ready for it to go out yet? If you are, you can approve it. If not, you can go in and make tweaks and customizations and whatnot. So I'm going to put an approve on here. We're sending the proposal via email, so I'll just leave it as the default there. The form that I want to send is going to be, because I have it built already, my proposal. The email that I'm going to send out is going to be wedding proposal. And in here, again, I won't read through the entire email, but again, in this email, what I'm telling them is once you're finished with the proposal, you will be taken to the contract where you can sign. Then you are required to have a 50% payment. I'm giving the client instructions on how they can navigate through this process because they don't know how this whole thing works. So by giving them these instructions in the email, it definitely allows the client to say, okay, I'm going to fill this out. Then I need to sign, then I need to pay. And my form link is in there, which creates the button that links to the form that I have picked. So it all links in there. So I'll click apply. And that's the first action there. Now we have 2 follow-ups that we're doing. So what I'm going to do is the same thing I did with the questionnaire, where I'm going to say add action, send form, because we're going to resend that proposal out to them. And the first one that I'm going to do is 3 days after. So in here, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, after form is not completed. Same idea as forms and schedulers. You can probably start to see a trend here. It's going to ask you which form are we watching. The only one that's in this workflow right now is the proposal. So we're watching the proposal. 3 days after it's not completed, I want to resend that proposal. So I'm going to choose my wedding photography proposal. We're matching here again. So we're resending that proposal. The email I'm going to use is one of my follow-ups. So in wedding, I have my proposal email and I also have my 2 follow-ups that have different language in them. So this one basically says, just checking to see if you're still interested in working with me. Attached is my proposal. So it's just checking in with them. Same idea, but it has that form link in there. So we can click apply. Okay. Now it's going to say wedding proposal, send that if the wedding proposal is not completed in 3 days. Now the next one, I'm going to have a moment of transparency. I talked about it yesterday. I actually was not correct on how the after form is not completed works if you have multiples going out. So let me explain what I mean by that. In the past, what I would have done with this workflow is I would have put it in 7 days if they have not signed it. But how our system actually works on the back end is that when this particular action fires, I'm trying to think of the right word, it restamps it as being sent. So technically, if I want this to be 7 days, what I would need to do is say send form, and I would say 4 days after the form is not completed, and that is right here. And I would choose the proposal, and I would say again, I want to resend out that proposal. And I'm going to explain this a little bit more here in a second, because I'm going to use my second proposal follow-up email, which basically says, I just wanted to follow up with you one more time just to see if you're interested in working with me. And it has the form link in there. So what I was referring to here is how it actually works in the system is, let's say that I send out the proposal today. 3 days from now, it's going to send the proposal again if they haven't filled it out. Then it resets. So 4 more days, it would send it again, which is technically a week from today. So a great thing to know here, because I've been teaching it wrong for the longest time, I'm not afraid to admit that, because I thought it worked differently. In here, what it's actually doing is adding it together. So I have 3 plus 4, that puts me at 7 days. So that's technically how that is designed to work. Now, I want to archive it if it's not filled out after 14 days. So for those of you at home who are great at math, what would we need to do for this fourth action? It would be 7. If you said 7 at home, that is the right answer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say archive project, basically saying I'm going to move it off of my leads list, and I'm going to put it in the archived bin if they haven't filled out the proposal after 14 days. Because for me and my business, basically I'm just saying after 2 weeks, they're probably not going to move forward. So let's just archive it, put it off to the side. So I'm going to say 7 days after form is not completed, and I'm going to watch the proposal. So now let's look at this here for a second. Let's talk through this. So we have 3 days, 4 more days would be 7, and then another 7 days is going to be 14 days that we're at. So I know this is a little weird because you kind of have to do math with this, but that's technically how the back end works, which I was not familiar with, that it restamps the time that it sends. So this right here would be 3, 7, and 14 days. And that is all of this particular workflow. We're good right there. Now, one thing that I am going to do here that's not in this particular process is talk about getting it to go to the booked workflow. Because in my process, it says once they sign the contract and pay the deposit, I want them to become a booked job. Now, moving them from the lead area into the job area, like I said, we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So don't worry about that too much. But what I am going to show you today is how to get it into that third workflow automatically. Because if they sign the contract and pay the deposit, I want my third workflow to start, which is booked, right? So I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, what I could do is, let's just say I'm in a position where if they only sign the contract, I want them to go into the next workflow. I could very easily come in here and say, start a workflow, because remember, we're going to start the next one, start a workflow after they sign their contract. I want the booked workflow to start. I could easily do that. And then basically once they sign the contract, it would start the third workflow automatically. If you are in a business where when they become a booked job is based off of a contract being signed, or maybe it's just as simple as after an invoice installment is paid and you can have it watch the deposit there. and it can move into the booked workflow, you can just set up one action here and it will automatically move them into the next workflow. But for all of my business owners that want the contract signed and also have that deposit paid, what you can use is an action called hold actions until. And that specific action is really great if you're wanting the workflow to watch for multiple things to happen before the next action happens. So I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to actually build it out so you can see what it's going to do. So what I'm going to say here is hold actions until immediately after the contract is signed. We're going to do that one first because we want them to at least sign the contract, right? So I'm going to plug that in. Then I'm going to do another one. So I'm going to say add action, hold actions until, and I'm going to say after an invoice installment is paid. Now, for those of you who are wondering, you might be looking at your workflow and saying, why don't I have the after invoice installment paid trigger? Do you have a different version of Dubsado than I do? No, the actual answer is because up in the top where you see the payment plan section, if you have a payment plan, then you have access to that trigger. If you don't have a payment plan there, then you will not see that trigger. So that's some good information for you. If you're wondering how to watch a deposit, I can click that. And then in here, it's going to say, which installment do we want to watch? If you click this drop down, then basically I can watch my first 50% deposit because it's looking at that payment plan that's added into the workflow. And I'll click apply. So in here, what I have is hold until the contract is signed, hold until the invoice is paid. Then after all of that is done, so I'll click add action. Once everything above it is done, now I want to start my workflow and have it moved into the booked section. So for those of you who are wanting multiple things to get accomplished before it moves on to the next workflow, what you'll do is put hold actions until and as many things that need to get done. Maybe also a questionnaire needs to get finished before it moves on. I could add that question in there or that in there as well. So it's watching both of those things, and then only once both of those things have been fulfilled would it move into the booked workflow. So that's a great reason to use hold actions until. Usually you don't need to use that unless you're looking at two different things, but this is a great way, these last three things here, on moving it into the next workflow based off of multiple stipulations. If you've gone through the education course, we actually have a video on that, basically watching for multiple conditions to be met. So that's how you can accomplish that. Now, the last thing I'm going to do, and then I'll open it up for questions here, is go through a little bit of the booked workflow so you can see that portion of it. There are some things that I want you all to see in this portion here. So the first thing that I'm doing in my booked workflow is I'm making that task. We talked about on Tuesday, I believe it was, all the secret to-dos that you might want to put into your workflow, like updating the project title to say whatever you want it to say, or setting a client portal password, or countersigning the contract. So I'm going to create a task here, add action, create to do. I'll assign it to myself like what we've been doing here. Immediately after the workflow starts, because remember, they've signed the contract, they've paid the invoice, so now it's going to start this next workflow. So the moment that this starts, we know that they filled out the proposal, they signed the contract, they've paid the invoice, and now we can move over into the booked workflow. So here, I'm going to say update project title. I'm going to say countersign contract, just because maybe I forget to do that a lot. If there's anyone else who out there who does that, make a to-do for it. Countersign the contract and set the portal password for And again, I'll just plug in some information here. Now, you don't have to do all this in one task. If you're someone who wants to split this up into 3 different tasks, you could do that. But for me, I think it's more efficient that if you're needing to do a group of things together, just throw it all into the same to-do. So you only have to check one box and then it'll move on to the next thing here. So I put everything in here. And if you want to, I'm just going to put this in here. You could even say something like this instead if you want to make this a little more fun, because we like to have fun at Dubsado. You could say client name is now booked. Excellent. And you can put in your task there. So if you want to make your to-dos more of like an assistant who's talking to you, if you want to make it more fun like that, you could do something along those lines. So your task would say, client name is now booked. Excellent. Update the project title and do all of these things. So that's how you can utilize these to-dos. And then I'll send an email to myself. Sure, we'll do that. You don't have to do that, but it's an option. So we'll just put it in there. So I have that to do. Now, this is the part that I really want people to know. So I want to make sure I get through at least this part, and then we might open it up for some questions because the rest of the workflow is pretty simple, is the client portal. A lot of people have been asking me how, if I'm going to do multiple things, if I need them to get 3 or 4 forms, or I need them to get schedulers, how can I do all of these different things and only send them one email? And the answer to that is you could just use the client portal to upload things into it. We talked about that a little bit earlier about just doing apply to portal, and that's all you would do. So we want to make sure we're activating the client portal. For those of you at home watching, if you're using activate portal as an action here, when you activate a client portal, it's not going to email anything to the client. The only thing activate portal does is it turns it on. It's not going to send anything to the client. They won't be notified. It just basically unlocks it. So activate portal, we'll just say immediately after all previous actions are complete here. So I have to check this task off first before it goes on to the next thing. Then what I want to do is I want to make another task to upload a Pinterest board into their portal. What I'm actually going to do here to simplify this, I'm going to do this on the fly here. Instead of making another task, what I'm actually going to do is edit this one. And I'll say, countersign the contract, set the portal password, and upload the Pinterest board into their portal. Okay. Now, there's probably going to be some questions on how do you do that? How can you put a Pinterest board or a Google Drive folder or things like that into a client portal? This is how you do that. If you go into a project and you need to go into their project, this is something you have to do manually. But if you click into a project here and go underneath the forms section, in this drop down, if you scroll past all of your master templates, there's an option towards the bottom that maybe some of you have not gotten to yet, but down at the bottom, there's an option called create one-time link. And what you can do here is you can put any external URL that you want to into the client portal. That means Vimeo videos. That means YouTube videos. That means Google Drive folders. That means Pinterest boards. That means Dropbox. Anything that has a URL attached to it, I can come in here and say Dubsado.com, and the title of the link will be Dubsado, and I can add this into their client portal. So we get a lot of questions on calls and things like that where people say, how do I upload images to the client portal, or how can I upload, a Google Drive folder? You can't necessarily do it pictures directly to the client portal, but if you just have a Google Drive folder or kind of a shared space, you can click this apply to portal button and it will upload it into the client portal for you. Very simple to do there. So basically, anything with a URL can go into their portal. So for coaches, if you have a Teachable link or a Kajabi link that you want them to have access to, all of that can be accessed through their client portal if you want them to. So that was just a little commercial. Now we'll come back over to our regular scheduled programming. So if we go to booked here, so I have all of my stuff in here. What's the next thing? Pinterest board, upload the welcome packet to their portal. So if I go in here and I say add action, send form, and I'm going to choose immediately after all previous actions are complete. So I'm just basically doing these things one after another. I'm going to choose apply to portal only here, because I don't want them to actually get this welcome packet. I want it to get uploaded into the client portal first. Because remember, now that they've paid, they haven't received anything yet. All of this is happening in the background. So I'll say apply to portal, click the drop down. I'm gonna grab my welcome packet and I'll apply that. Then I also want to do my wedding timeline. I know that I have that written in there, so I'll just do that here. So I'm going to say add action, send form. I'm going to say apply to portal. And then in here, I'll do my timeline. Now, again, all of these things are going into the client portal. We're not sending these. A lot of times people say, well, it says send form. The workflow is still technically sending something, but it's just sending it to the portal instead of via email. So these will still say send form, but if you click into them, it's only apply to portal. It's not sending it via email. So what I've done here is I've basically front loaded all of this information in their portal. And now what I can do is I can go in and click add action, and I can say send form, and this is immediately after all previous actions are complete here. And I'm also going to put an approve button on this as well. The form that I'm going to send here. Now, in this particular email, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my portal guide information, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the client portal email that I have, which has their login information here. So I'm going to take a second to explain this portal guide. Inside of your form section in Dubsado, actually, let me apply this and I'll visually show you because it is important for you all to see this. In the form section in Dubsado, there's a template library in the top right-hand corner. If you click on that, maybe some of you didn't even know this was here. There is a whole lot of templates that are pre-made that you can use and apply to your brand and then edit once they've been added in. Down towards, I believe it's the bottom down here. Let me make sure that I know where it's at, or maybe it's up towards the top. Let me scroll up here. Oh, it's right here. There is something inside of the template library called the client portal guide. This is basically a way to instruct your clients on how to navigate the client portal. So if you are wanting to give them information on this is how you're actually going to go through the client portal, this is available for everybody in the template library, and you can add this to your account. So in my email that I'm using for the client portal, let me open this up here again. This is saying I'm going to send the client portal guide via email because I want them to get that in the email. In the body of this email, I'm giving them instructions on what has been uploaded into their portal. So I'm saying, review your welcome packet, access the Pinterest board if I put one in there. You can access your Google Drive folder. You can review the timeline and book your kickoff session, which I still need to put that in the portal as well. So that's actually a step that I missed because I wasn't actually going back to my process here. So the other thing that you have to have in your portal email is the portal link and password. Remember, Activate Portal does not actually send them anything. So you have to actually put in the link and password for them to be able to log in, okay? So we'll click apply there, and that will be my email. I'm also going to go back because I forgot to upload the kickoff session in there. So let me do send appointment scheduler. We'll leave immediately after all previous actions are complete. We're going to say apply to portal, and we're going to put the kickoff session in their portal as well. So I'll click apply here. And for those of you, maybe this question has been asked already in the chat, so I'll just tell you, you can reorder your actions. So if you, right here, if I want to move this before the portal information goes out, I can just click and drag and it'll put it in that slot. Now you want to make sure that chronologically it makes sense here and you're using the right triggers. But if you do want to reorganize your list, you can just simply click and drag and you can move it wherever you want it to go there. So that's how you can utilize the client portal in your workflows. Do everything that you want to their portal first, then send out one email, has all the information in there, and it says, hey, log into your portal, you'll be able to access everything. So what I'm going to do, it's 10:30 already, so we've hit an hour. I'm going to wrap up the session today, and we're going to jump in and answer some questions because I know there's probably a ton of questions. So I'm going to get into those and answer as many as I can today. And we'll talk about the rest of the workflow tomorrow when we get into organizing everything. So